Уважаемые коллеги, всем здравствуйте. Юрий Александрович.
Здравствуйте.
Как слышно?
Здравствуйте.
Отлично. Ну, мы ждем несколько минут тогда и
Здравствуйте.
будем начинать.
Здравствуйте, добрый вечер.
Всем добрый вечер.
Нормально, да.
Давайте, я думаю, подождем еще пару минут. Я сейчас запущу трансляцию нашей конференции в наши социальные сети, чтобы все желающие тоже могли посмотреть. И буквально через пару минут тогда начнем, если никто не возражает.
Нет.
Все всех хорошо видят? Все всех хорошо слышат? Спасибо, что вы с нами. Очень приятно познакомиться.
Спасибо вам.
Будем надеяться, что в будущем не только на виртуальной площадке сможем встретиться. У нас довольно много очных мероприятий проходит, вот таких дискуссионных. Так что мы будем ждать вас.
В Москве нам гораздо проще вас принять, чем приехать к вам.
Да, это мы знаем, но тем не менее Российский центр науки и культуры находится в Брюсселе, поэтому те мероприятия, которые мы здесь проводим, мы проводим здесь, в Брюсселе, с участием в том числе российских представителей. На самом деле нужно проводить и там, и в Москве, и в Брюсселе, и в других местах.
На Курильских островах.
В том числе. Why not? Ну что, 5 минут вежливости.
Еще минуту и можем начинать. Сейчас вот как раз запускается трансляция на Фейсбуке. И как только это произойдет, с секунды на секунду буквально, мы сможем начать. Так, ну все, трансляция везде запущена. Мы готовы.
Можем начинать?
Да, мне кажется, самое время это сделать.
Добрый вечер, дорогие друзья. Good evening, hello, dear friends, and welcome to the virtual platform of Russian Center in Brussels, Europe. Today we are starting a new project, a project of the discussion club Connecting Point, and today we'll talk about the end of the World War II and how the world we know today was shaped. It just so happened that for us, both the Russians and the Europeans, the main battles of this war unfolded in Europe against the Nazi Germany. But after the surrender of the Reich in May 1945, the war did not end. It continued in the East against the Imperial Japan. How it was and what were the consequences of the World War II for the whole world, we'll discuss it today. And I have the honor to announce our partner, the Russian Society for Military History Studies. That is the leading Russian analytical center focused on studies about military past and preventing attempts to distort this history. The society was established by decree of the Emperor Nicholas II in 1907 as one of the 4 imperial societies, along with Russian Historical Society, the Russian Geographical Society, and the Orthodox Palestine Society, and ceased to operate in 1917. But nowadays, in the modern Russia, all these societies created by Nicholas II resumed their work by presidential decrees, and the Russian Society for Military History Studies got started his new work in 2012. Now, many honorable historians, governmental officials are members of this association. And I'm very glad to introduce Mr. Yuri Nikiforov, head of the scientific department, who will address the audience on behalf of the society, and Mr. Oleg Zdvizhkov, historian, member of the society, who will be the main speaker today. And I'm very glad to introduce as well the moderators of our discussion, our colleagues from the Russian Center in Brussels, Europe, Lukiana Suvorova and Vitaly Mlechin. And we invite you to ask questions personally by raising your hand in Zoom. You have the button for it, or write your comments in the chat and comments on our pages in social media. But there is one more important thing that we wanted to do before starting our discussion, is to present to your attention the online exhibition created by the Victory Museum in Moscow. Exhibition entitled From Kremlin to the Reichstag, organized by the Embassy of Russia to Belgium. The graphic works and poster tell us about the events of the 1940s, and the atmosphere of the wartime is transmitted by brushes and pencils of the artists who participated themselves personally in the battles. You will find the exhibition on the websites of the Russian Embassy to Belgium and our Russian Center in Brussels. It will be available from September 3 to September 30. And today with us is Ms. Violetta Churakova, the press attaché of the Embassy of Russian Federation to Belgium. Violetta, please, we are waiting for your words about this exhibition.
Thank you, Vera Georgievna. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So my introduction just will be really brief and short. So let me present to your attention the exhibition based on the funds of the Victory Museum from the Kremlin to Reichstag to mark the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. So I will demonstrate do you see the poster, yes, now on the screen? No?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
See it. It's okay.
Okay. So this exhibition is organized together with the Russian Center for Science and Culture in Brussels. And the collection comprises works made by the artists of 40s. In wartime, many artists, professionals, and novice fans fought on the front. They took part in the biggest fierce battles of the time. Among them, there were quite a few volunteers who went to the front in the early days of war. They fought in artillery, in tank forces, in partisan and reconnaissance units, but most of them in infantry. Together with everyone, they really froze in the trenches, went on the attic, and also they shared the pain of retreat and the joy of victory. And during the war years, their talent grew stronger and stronger. That's why they were able to create exciting works because they were really at the center of the events. They organically combine, so this works organically combine the author's the author's feelings and the objective truth of war. It's interesting to examine the different techniques of the artists. Laconic lineate prints, watercolor, paintings, pencil drawings, and so on. You will familiarize yourself with the works created by such artists and illustrators as Piotr Zubchenko, whose paintings were published in the newspapers Combat Training and Moskovsky Komsomolis. And actually my favorite picture of the whole exhibition of the drawing is this one, Raisa Skvortsova, Trevorrow worker. Also such artists as Anatoly Kokorin, originally known as illustrator of the tales by Anderson Radari Pirot, translated of course in Russian times USSR, and he went to the front to fight against Nazis. Boris Sherbakov, whose works are well known, whose works, yes, he's here, whose works are well known at the world art markets. Also, works by Viktor Bibikov, Evgeny Komarov, Petr Maltsev, Solomon Boyn, and many others. This exhibition display, the exhibition display boards are chronologically divided in 6 themes: Battle of Moscow, Battle of the Dnieper, one of the largest battles in the world history, Battle of Stalingrad, the Battle of Kursk, Siege of Leningrad, and of course, Berlin Strategic Offensive Operation. That speeds are combined by historical references and stories, so it will be really interesting to follow it on the websites of the Russian Embassy, and also there are links on the site of the Center of the Russian Culture Center. And as already very said, it will be presented to the public from September, from the 3rd September to the 30th. So the link are will be in the chat below. So thank you, and hope you enjoy the evening and also the exhibition.
Thank you so very much, Violetta. We are sure that it is very interesting and really very important exhibition, and we invite all our participants to visit it on our website. I repeat that it will be shown on the website of the Embassy of the Russian Federation to Belgium and on Russian Center in Brussels website. And my colleague Vitaly Mlechin just sent the link on the chat to discover this exhibition. And now, thank you, Violetta, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Yuri Novikov to address the participants of our discussion on behalf of the Russian Society for Military History Studies. Mr. Nikiforov, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening. Уважаемые коллеги, я прошу прощения, что несколько слов скажу на русском языке в нашем серьезном разговоре. Предваряя выступление основного нашего спикера Олега Сдвижкова, прежде всего я хотел бы поблагодарить вас, организаторов этой конференции, за то, что Российское военно-историческое общество привлечено к участию в нашем лице. Наша принципиальная позиция нашей работы, она состоит в том, что на современные вызовы, связанные с пересмотром отношений ко Второй мировой войне, роли участия отдельных стран во Второй мировой войне, она основана и должна быть основана на языке фактов, документов, исторических источников. И разговор мы всегда хотели бы вести с нашими, в том числе зарубежными, именно на языке логики. Собственно, так мы их планируем сегодня построить разговор. Позиция наша, она основана на том, что победа была одержана общими усилиями стран антигитлеровской коалиции, прежде всего Советского Союза, Великобритании и США, и Китайской Народной Республики. Победа была одержана не просто над Германией или просто над Японией, а над блоком стран-агрессоров, который противостоял неагрессивным странам. И то, что Советский Союз, если вести разговор о том, что происходило на поле боя, сыграл внес решающий вклад в усилия антигитлеровской коалиции по разгрому главных сил фашистско-милитаристского блока. Это неоспоримый факт, который трудно отрицать всем людям, кто обратится к статистике, к цифровым показателям. Но об этом мы поговорим, безусловно, Олег Владимирович подробно может об этом рассказать. Завтра в Москве откроется международная, ну или лучше сказать, всероссийская конференция научная с международным участием. Она будет проходить как раз в Музее Победы, замечательную выставку, которую мы видели сейчас. И около 100 человек, историков и российских, и из некоторых стран, кто согласился в условиях пандемии непосредственно участвовать в проведении этой конференции. Мы будем говорить о необходимости, и в проекте резолюции, который мы предложим участникам этой конференции, будет предложено строить наши сегодняшние, в том числе историографические оценки, на незыблемости и значимости для современности устава и приговора Нюрнбергского трибунала над военными преступниками и Токийского военного трибунала над японскими милитаристами. Те же политизированные, идеологизированные трактовки истории, которые сейчас очень часто звучат в европейских СМИ, которые входят в противоречие с вот этими основополагающими документами для послевоенной системы, в том числе международных отношений, они, безусловно, будут встречать со стороны России негативную реакцию, потому что, подчеркиваю, наша позиция основана на том, что вот эти международные процессы и принятые по их итогам документы, они сохраняют свое значение для сегодняшнего дня, и пересматривать эти решения было бы крайне безответственно с точки зрения общеевропейского или даже мирового, если хотите, будущего. Большое спасибо. Я передаю слово Олегу Владимировичу, и если это нужно, то он мое вступление он озвучит сейчас на английском языке. Вернее, ну, краткое содержание. Да,
Спасибо, Юрий Александрович. Да, таким образом у нас дискуссия получается реально билингвальной. Спасибо за ваше выступление на русском. Я думаю, наши слушатели и участники, которые особенно смотрят нас на Фейсбуке, с удовольствием оценят это на русском языке и на английском после того, как его действительно резюме озвучит. Thank you so much, Mr. Nikiforov, and we are going on with our discussion. So the floor is yours. You're welcome.
Oh, okay. So what would I say? You know, coming here, I decided to check what is available on YouTube, you know, about that war, Soviet war against Japan and Far East. And what I found, to my surprise, that there is almost nothing. I found one about half an hour video. It was called actually Forgotten War. and several, maybe half a dozen very short 2-3 minutes videos. And most of them, what they say, what they try to say, that Soviet Union at that war behaved like some kind of wild animal. You know, it attacked weak, almost destroyed Japan and grabbed its territory at the moment when Japan was not able to fight, and such and such and such. And well, so it, from most of these videos, it looks like Soviet Union just came and started to fight without any serious reason. But what is interesting, there was a serious reason for that. Actually, American president asked Russians to help in the war against Japan as early as in December of 1941, soon after Japanese attack against Pearl Harbor. Then American and British asked Stalin again on conference in 1943, and Stalin promised to get involved, but not earlier than 6 months after hostilities in Europe would end. Then again, during Yalta conference, they asked Stalin to help them, and he promised that help, but now he said that Russians would get into the war against Japan in 2 or 3 months after the end of the war in Europe. So it was not actually just a Russian decision to come and fight against Japan. That Russia, Soviet Union at that time did it because it was allied with United States and Great Britain. Then what we had at that war, Japanese forces in Manchuria, before the war, they had about 300,000 soldiers there, and then they increased the Kwantung Army to about 1 million people. Actually, American historian David Glantz estimates that in Manchuria itself, Japanese had over 700,000 soldiers, plus 200-something thousand on South Sakhalin and Kuril Islands. In addition, there was an army of Manchu Corps about and Inner Mongolia, puppet states of Japan, and those armies together, they had some 200-250,000 people. So we can speak about 1 million, from million to about 1.3 million soldiers on Japanese side. And Soviets were able to concentrate by August of 1945, were able to concentrate, some historians give slightly different numbers, but it's in between 1.5 million to little over 1.6 million people. So actually Russian operation in Manchuria is comparable to any major operations on the Eastern Front during the Second World War. And Japanese decided to surrender actually just in 5 days after the beginning of Russian invasion. But not all Japanese units received the order from the emperor right away. And some Japanese units decided not to follow that order. So the fight continued until practically end of August, and August 20, and Russians started to move their forces on South Sakhalin and Kuril Islands, where the fight continued until September 2nd. And to say that Russians just came, you know, if Japan already wanted to surrender on August 15, and Russians just started to fight on Kuril Islands on August 20, and so that's the reason why some people can say Russia invaded Japan when it was not fighting anymore. Well, if it was so, then Russian troops on Kuril Islands and South Sakhalin would be met by Japanese officers with white flags, but it was not so. Russian forces were met by fierce resistance, and they suffered considerable losses. In absolute numbers, Russian losses were not great because there were not too many troops involved, but in some places, Russian losses reached about 30% of all soldiers involved in attacks. So Japanese continued to resist until September 2nd, the day when they finally signed the instrument of surrender on board of Missouri. So that's what we can say about that war. So it was very short. That's maybe one of the reasons why it was forgotten, because it just Russians started on August 9. They started actually a few minutes after midnight on August 9. They crossed the border of Mongolia, Mongolian People's Republic, and about 1 hour later they crossed the Soviet Manchurian border. And within practically 2 weeks, they finished that war. And Japanese, well, they tried to organize a resistance to Russians, but they were not able to do that. They actually had some strong points of defense on a few roads available in that area. But Russians, who had great experience of war in Europe, of war against Wehrmacht, and Wehrmacht, I believe, was probably one of the best military machines in human history. And Russians got such a great experience that they wouldn't worry about roads. They would just build roads as they went, and they were able to come at points where Japanese didn't actually expect to see them. So they totally denied them the opportunity for an organized retreat and organizing any defense. So that's what I can say about this war.
Thank you very much for this presentation. If you won't mind, we have a couple of questions to you, and maybe it would be, well, logical at least to start with 1941. Why didn't Japan attack the Soviet Union? Why did Japan decide to attack the United States but not the USSR? As far as I'm concerned, our military command, the Soviet military command, was very, well, afraid that the Japanese would attack and the Soviet troops will have to fight on two fronts, but that didn't happen. Why didn't Japan attack the Soviet Union in 1941?
Well, there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, they had, well, very bad experience in 1938 and 1939. So at least at that time, Russians were able to prove that they're another easy enemy, that there would not be any easy victory against them. So it's the first reason, I believe. Second reason, Japan as a country, and it's a reason for what was happening from 1937 on, until 1945, it doesn't have natural resources. First of all, oil. So, and Japanese estimated that if they got involved in a serious war against Soviet Union, they would need a lot of oil, and they didn't have that oil. So the only way to get it was to start to fight in Southeast Asia to get sources of oil. So it's another reason, so like economical reason. And one more thing, well, I would call one more reason. From 1937, they tried to take control over China, but Chinese were resisting. And they still couldn't get total control over China. So they had a considerable size of their land forces in China. To attack Soviet Union, they would have to pull some forces from China. But Chinese resistance wouldn't allow them to pull enough forces. There is one actually very small but interesting reason. Russians definitely, after June 1941, they had to move some troops from Far East to European part of the country. But they made it in a way that Japanese couldn't see it. So they created an impression that they still have a huge group of forces up to 1 million men. And like to attack someone, the army has to have superiority at least 2 times, better 3 times at least 1.5 times. So, you know, if Japanese estimated Russian forces as 1 million people, then they had to assemble in Manchuria at least 1.5 million, or better, 2 million people. But they were not able to do that because, well, they needed army in Japan. So there are many things which brought that Japanese decision not to fight. But at the same time, they were able to keep considerable army along Russian border. And so Russians moved some troops, but they still had to keep considerable amount of troops along that far eastern border. And the troops, you know, they would better use them against Germany. So even not fighting against Soviet Union, Japan pulled some considerable Russian forces away from front in European part of the country. So there is no like one reason why they didn't do that. There are many of them. Yeah, by the way, what else I would say? The German success in Russia, Japanese expected the Germans to be a little more successful than they were. And so they kind of waited to the moment when Russia would show the sign of collapse. And that sign never came. If Germans, let's say, took Moscow, the Japanese probably would get involved, but they didn't. Germans asked them, but then they said, you know, it's cold in Siberia, you know, to start the war, we'll wait till spring. Then they were waiting, and expecting Russia to collapse again. What I believe they wanted to do, just come at the point that Soviet Union starts to collapse, and then they grab the territory. Because one thing, they actually were afraid that Germans would be so successful that they would take Siberia as well. So there is a whole number, like I would say, probably a dozen of little reasons which brought to that end. And Japanese, they were still kind of in a process of thinking and considering the possible invasion Soviet Union until, well, 1933, when they finally gave up. But in 1933, I believe everybody understood that Germany would not win that war.
Thank you for the answer. I guess my colleague Lukiana Suvorova also has questions. Lukiana, it's your turn.
Thank you very much for your introduction and for your speech. And I have a question actually also about the beginning of the Second World War. We know that nowadays we have more Eurocentric positions in history, but still there are some historians that they consider that the Second World War started in 1937 when Japan actually invaded China, so-called Lugao incident. Please comment, why still we consider the beginning of Second World War 1939, but not 1937?
You know, well, it's kind of a traditional view, but what I believe is going to happen is influence of China, you know, in the world. It gets bigger and bigger, you know, and now it's, you know, they say it's probably the first economic power in the world, or maybe the second. Well, nobody knows if it's first or second yet. And I believe as things would change, you know, and China would become more powerful state, then the view of those events will change. Because, you know, when that picture of the Second World War developed, China was a poor, weak country with many hungry people. Who would care about China? You know, China, People's Republic of China was not even invited for San Francisco Conference in 1951 to sign a peace treaty with Japan. You know, like one of the major victims of Japanese aggression was not invited because they didn't care about China at that time. And it is very different now. And that's because they didn't care. Why would they bother about, like someone invaded China? But I think it might change because eventually.
Could it also be the interest of Russia? Because nowadays there are many forces, I would say, from Western part who are claiming Russia for, or especially USSR, for starting the war because of this pact. So I guess that this opinion that the war started in earlier would also change the whole perspective of the Second World War.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what's interesting here? There are forces that would not like to change this picture. Exactly for that reason you explained, because they want to blame Soviet Union to make the Soviet Union one of the countries which started the war. And if we say that was started in China, and for me, I would rather say that the Second World War started in China. And actually, Chinese suffered the heaviest losses. I think they lost over 30 million people or something. And most of them actually not military losses, but civilian population, which was just murdered by Japanese. So China really deserved the place in world history, in the history of World War II, but there are many forces that wouldn't like that, because then it would totally exterminate the reason, to blame the Soviet Union for anything. And Soviet Union, it was involved in the military action against Japan since 1938. And actually, most times, it was not Soviet Union who attacked. First, Japanese forces attacked Soviet territory, and then Japanese forces decided to attack territory of People's Republic of Mongolia, which was a ally of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. And another one question, in your opinion, how do you think, did it stop actually Japan from invading Russia, the operations in 1937 and 1938 at the Lake Hassan and the river Halkingol? Because as far as I know, we showed the force there, so maybe Japan were more afraid after the operations.
Yeah, definitely. Those operations were very important because Japanese realized that they would not get easy victory over Soviet Union. And they, especially at Halkingol, they suffered heavy losses, and it's still not clear how many Japanese were killed. And it's like, they do not, well, actually, nobody likes, to say how many soldiers they lost. It's probably only in Russia we have more or less exact numbers. If we take German losses during Second World War, it's still, this, they lost 2 million soldiers. They had 23 million people to be, they could call to army, and what happened to all those people that they lost 2 million, then that means that 21 million of Germans were just hanging around during the war. Well, you cannot imagine that happened. The same Japanese don't like too much to speak about their losses, but there were considerable losses. So they decided that, well, at least they realized that they would have to assemble a very serious force. So that force, they had to be superior in 2 or 3 times to be successful against the Soviet Union. And definitely those 2 operations, Lake Hassan and Halkingol, they, I think, cool down, minds of Japanese command.
One more important question. Why did the Soviet Union finally decide to join the war against Japan? You already talked a little bit about it, that the allies asked from Moscow to begin this war, but why did Moscow finally decide to join this war, and why in 1947?
Well, there were, I would say, like 2 groups of reasons for that. First of all, the Soviet Union was an ally of the United States and the Great Britain, and it promised them to help. So it was some kind of international obligation of the Soviet Union at the moment. So on one side. And on another side, the Soviet Union had its own interests, which were going back in history, because, you know, at the end of 19th century, Russia started to expand into territory of Manchuria. That project, initiated by Prime Minister Sergei Vita, was called Zheltorussia, Yellow Russia, because the Chinese people, they were called at that time in Russia as yellow race, like white race, black race, and yellow race, like Chinese, Japanese, all these people. So the project was called Yellow Russia, Zheltorussia. And Russia built a seaport of Dalny. Dalny means located far away. And built a military base, Port Arthur, nearby. And then it built a railroad, Eastern Chinese Railroad through Manchuria, connecting Russian city of Chita and Russian city of Vladivostok. It was much shorter than to go along Russian border. And then as a result of Russian-Japanese War of 1904-1905, Russia lost all those territories. So, well, it didn't control territory, but it had like villages on those territories and could use both that military base and that seaport for their advantage. And that seaport, Dalny, it's nowadays it's a Chinese city of Dalian. Yeah, sounds kind of similar. And in between those wars, it was controlled by Japanese with the Iran. So Russians wanted to get their influence over that territory back. That's a problem, you know, because to get to the ocean from Russian shore was very difficult because of ice conditions and stuff like that. So they wanted to have a seaport in warm waters. So, and then the island of Sakhalin, according to Russian-Japanese Treaty of 1875, the island, at that time, they decided, well, what happened before? The first treaty between Russian Empire and Japan happened in 1855. And at that time, they divided Kuril Islands between both countries, and the island of Sakhalin, they made like a joint possession. But then in 20 years, in 1875, they signed a new treaty. And according to that treaty, all of Kuril Island went to Japan, but all of Sakhalin became Russian possession. And then during the war of 1904-1905, Japan occupied this southern part of Sakhalin. So Russians wanted to return this part of Sakhalin. Actually, to take back what earlier belonged to Russia. Speaking about Kuril Islands, yeah, it's kind of more complex story. Definitely, we cannot say that we're like Russians all the time. Russians first started to explore those islands at the end of 17th century, and Japanese actually started that process a little earlier, like first half of 17th century. And so they were moving Russians from north, from Kamchatka Peninsula, and Japanese from the south. And for a while, you know, it was okay. Islands were populated by Ainu people, so they were not Japanese at first. And then at 1875, it was decided that all islands would be controlled by Japanese. So, but why Russians wanted to get those islands now? And Stalin actually made it explain to Nikolai that he would the war if he get South Sakhalin and get control over Sakhalin Islands. Because for Russia, any foreign control of those islands would practically block Russia from Pacific Ocean. There was no way for Russian Navy or whatever vessels they had to reach Pacific Ocean. And actually, before when Soviet Union and Japan signed a neutrality pact in April of 1941, Japanese asked Russians to sell them northern part of Sakhalin. So they wanted to keep southern part of Sakhalin and wanted to buy northern part. And Stalin refused because this way Russia would be blocked from Pacific Ocean. So they wanted to get those islands, and Americans, they didn't mind. Actually, some American officials, they tried to tell President Roosevelt that he shouldn't let Russians to increase his influence over the territory, but Roosevelt said, just don't bother me with that crap, you know, everything is fine. So that's another, you know, so Russians had like international obligation and its own national interests, which actually made it to move troops into Manchuria.
How was the fighting going on? Was it, well, very hard for the Soviet army to advance against the Japanese? And one more very important topic, how was the cooperation between Soviet and Allied forces was going? So was it, well, easy to cooperate, to coordinate the military actions?
You know, Allies and Soviets, they operated in different parts of Asia. You know, in Manchuria or Kuril Islands or Sakhalin, no Allied forces except for Mongolian forces were involved. Only Russian forces. The fight, well, it was not definitely as tough as it would be in Europe, you know, when they were fighting against Germany. They had tremendous logistic problems because there were no roads over there. So Russians had to construct their own roads, and they were very successful. And actually, tanks, you know, some very often was hard to use tanks, but they used them to break trees, you know, and make this, you know, roads in the forest. And they moved very fast and up to 50 kilometers a day, and Japanese just didn't have time to organize any serious resistance. So, and total Russian losses, well, they lost, total losses, I would say it's something 36,000 people, I believe, and about out of them like 12,000 were killed. So the losses, if we take like out of 1.6 million soldiers involved, not very high. So Japanese mustered some serious resistance in some spots, but it was not like serious resistance all over. Most of the time they just tried to retreat, and Russians often would come and find that Japanese forces nowhere. They just disappeared. And then, you know, Japanese lost, well, but I believe something over 80,000 Japanese were killed. So it shows that they tried to resist in a serious way. But prisoners of war, well, that number is much greater. It's estimated now over 600,000.
And did the European forces fight against the Japanese too?
Yes, American and British, but not in Manchuria. It was islands, Pacific Islands, Yuma, whatever. Southeast Asia, but not here. It's only Russia. And, yeah, and what is interesting about that Russian fighting, it was organized in a very smart way, because Trans-Baikal Front, Russian arranged three fronts, Trans-Baikal Front, First Far Eastern Front, and Second Far Eastern Front. So Trans-Baikal Front advanced from territory of Mongolia, and it had to cut Japanese forces in Manchuria from in southern China. So it was moving along that border. And Russian First Far Eastern Front was moving south from Soviet territory and along the shore, so it would prevent any possible landing of any reinforcement, or would prevent any possible evacuation of Kwantung Army to main Japanese islands. So those forces were kind of surrounded by Transbaikal and first Far Eastern Front, and then second Far Eastern Front attacked about in the middle of the border between Soviet Union and Manchuria to split Japanese forces in pieces. That's how it went.
Thank you, Lukiana.
Yes, yes, and continuing actually this topic, I also would like to ask, at the beginning of war, it was maybe more evident why United States wanted Soviet Union to join the operation on the East. But in 1945, when they already created atomic bomb and when actually they kind of announced it also to the Soviet Union that they are going to use this force, what was the interest for them in this sense for Soviet Union to join the war?
Yeah, I say, yeah, it's actually, you know, it's like an ongoing discussion since, I believe, 1945 between first Soviet, now Russians, and then Western historians. And Western side says, well, okay, Japan surrendered because American dropped those nuclear bombs. And Russians say, oh, no, stop. They surrendered because, you know, we invaded. So, you know, so they cannot come to any agreement, you know, why Japanese did that. And I would say, Americans created the bomb, but they were not able to build a lot of them. They actually had 2 bombs, and both of them were dropped on Japan. So if, for any reason, Japanese were so insane that they wouldn't stop fighting, there would be nothing else to drop on Japan, just conventional weapons, and it didn't help. So probably Americans were not 100% sure that it would help. And then, you know, we cannot, right now, what's interesting, because American bombing and Soviet invasion, they happened about the same time. First American bomb fell on August 6, and second on August 9, and Russians started right after midnight on August 9. Like first hours of August 9. So both of these events happened kind of almost at the same time. That's why right now very hard for us to say what forced Japanese to surrender. For my opinion, that probably both of them did that. Because Japanese, they actually had plans, if, you know, they cannot resist, you know, on the Japanese islands, to evacuate emperor to Manchuria. Plus, they could use those troops, like million troops, move them from Manchuria to main islands and organize very strong resistance. And they actually had ideas, you know. It's like for us, for people like of European culture, it's very hard to imagine, but there were ideas in Japan that whole nation has to sacrifice itself, like we're gonna get all killed, like 100 million people will disappear from the face of the earth. But humanity will remember the proud nation, which, you know, tried to do the best, but failed. Something like that, you know. So among Japanese leadership, there were some really insane ideas. So probably Americans were not 100% sure that those bombs would have. Plus, if they had a dozen of them, a couple dozen, maybe they would, could do anything, but they had just 2 of them. So let's say they drop a second one and Japanese don't surrender, and then what? You know, but with Russian forces coming and Russians left for Japanese no way to escape. They couldn't evacuate anyone to Manchuria, they couldn't get any reinforcement from Manchuria. So this combination of these 2 factors probably forced them to surrender.
And could you please also comment, I read some articles that Japanese people, especially young people, they consider right now that actually Soviet Union put the bomb. So why it happened in history?
Well, I believe whereas probably nobody just speaks about that. They speak about bomb, but they don't make a point that bomb was dropped by Americans. And at the same time, they speak a lot. I assume, you know, I don't read Japanese, you know, so I cannot exactly say what they have in their mass media, but I would assume, at least what I can read from Russian sources, that Soviet Union is being blamed for like invasion, for taking Japanese land and stuff like this. So kind of an image of an enemy. And at the same time, the parallel to that, they speak about the bomb. They don't even have to say that Soviet Union dropped the bomb. They say, oh, Soviet Union was such a bad thing, invaded our land. And then someone else says, oh, someone dropped a bomb on us, and in people's mind, these two facts would come together, say, oh, probably Soviet Union dropped the bomb because it invaded our land and so on and so on. Because actually Americans came to Japanese island, to main Japanese island after surrender. They just came as occupation force, not as like fighting force. Like Russian forces, for example, on Kuril Islands, they were fighting. Even Japanese were supposed to just meet them, and say, okay, we give up, but they were resisting. But they were not resisting any longer when the Americans came. And whatever fights they had on some islands, it was somewhere, but not territory of Japan, they didn't fight with Americans.
But it's quite unfair, I would say. This.
Yeah, well, yeah. Unfortunately, but it's how like mass media is able to create certain picture without even lying about things, but making some accents, and it doesn't have to hide the fact. I believe it's possible to find very easily in Japan that bombs were dropped by United States. But it is not repeated all over the time, and that's it.
Well, it's about the statistics and how the society can make mistakes. Well, our society makes mistakes too, unfortunately. Only today I've read an article that half of our people, so about 48% of respondents, told that the Second World War began in 1941. So half of our population makes no difference between the Second World War and the Great Patriotic War. Well, we can understand why, because the war against Hitler was the main war for us. But what is interesting too is that not only the Second World War against Hitler in Europe, but also the Second World War against Japan at the Far East is not remembered. And I'm almost sure that most of our people think that the Second World War ended in May 1945. And there are a lot of people, I guess, in Europe that think so as well. Why do you think that happened? Against Japan not so well notorious? Why did everyone forget about this war?
Well, first of all, that war was very short. I actually remembered always about that war with Japan, because what happened, both of my grandmas, they had brothers, and both of them were fighting against Japan. One of them, he was actually fighting from the very beginning of the Great Patriotic War, started in Western Ukraine and went all the way deep in the country, and then all the way to Europe. I believe he ended war in Vienna, and then their unit was sent to Japan. And a brother of another grandma, he was too young, so he was not drafted during the Great Patriotic War, but he came to age by the time of the war with Japan, so he was drafted and went to fight and brought some leather coat. I remember that leather coat I found in my grandma firewood barn. It was like very nice looking leather coat, and it had some, thing in Japanese, written like inside. All that, but it's for me. It's just in my family. It's happened that two people actually were fighting in that war, and for most of people, well, definitely they don't have anyone who was fighting, because the whole number of troops, just 1.5 million, is out of about 35 million people who joined the Red Army during the Great Patriotic War. So it's just 1.5 out of 35 million. And second thing, that war was very short, and actually altogether like around 2 weeks done. Nothing serious, nothing as huge, you know, in terms of like efforts and losses and everything, as it was in western part of the country or in Eastern Europe. And second of all, for some reason, that war, even in Soviet time, was not advertised as much as the war against Germany. I don't, I was born in Soviet Union, and actually, by the time Soviet Union collapsed, I was close to 30 years old. I think I was 28 or 29, so I already was graduated from university, was a teacher in school and stuff. And I don't remember anything in Soviet propaganda, any like close attention to that war. Like war against Germany, yeah, but war against Japan, I don't only remember any movie. I'm actually not sure if there is any movie about that war of 1945. And for most of people, you know, they get information not from history books, but movies, you know, songs, you know, all this type of stuff, which go through mass media. And there was not much of that at the time. What the reason for that, I don't know. Maybe the Soviet leaders tried to build some kind of good relations with Japan. They didn't want to bring it up, you know, to remind them something they didn't like, because they definitely don't like that they lost Carolinas. But well,
what do you think, as a historian, how important is for a society to remember the whole truth, the exact dates? Is it vital that the society remembers that the Second World War started in 1939 and ended in September, not in May 1945? Or is it enough to remember the main war, the war with Hitler?
well, you know what happens. Usually a school system is blamed that, you know, that in school they don't tell kids like everything, and that's why people don't know. But it's more than school. First of all, well, in school they have limited numbers of hours to study that war. So you know, they have few hours actually to study the Great Patriotic War. They start to add the war against Japan. They would need additional hours, and nobody is gonna give them those additional hours. So the opportunity of a school system, you know, they're very limited. But what is important? It's a whole picture in mass media, you know, because if that disappears from anywhere, you know, if it was in the news, you know, in movies, you know, articles by each anniversary, you know, those events, but I don't see it. Looks like nobody pays close attention. And school, what people, yeah, they get something from school. But if it's not repeated, like in Soviet time, you know, we got something in school, and then not only about history, about physics, chemistry, you know, biology, you know, whatever. And then it was repeated in a number of programs, you know, on TV, radio, and stuff like that. And then so people, you know, very smart. They knew a lot, but not because they were good students at school, not only because they were students at school, but because this information would just go around all the time. But that war was kind of in shadow, I would say, even in Soviet time. And now many people actually question, you know, some problems of the Great Patriotic War, you know, not the war with Japan. So,
Luciana?
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, following also this topic, I would like to ask you about general image, I would say, about Second World War. Yes, it's evident that many people remembering more what touched them, their families, their relatives. The same, I guess, for Europeans or Americans. Not everybody knows about existence of Great Patriotic War. When we speak here with many Europeans, we have to explain them what do we mean and why it is very important for us. And I saw one of your lecture about the Western historical books. And I would like to ask you to recommend, or maybe also to tell us if there is some program for about information campaign about telling the society, also Western society, Asian society, about our point of view. Because sometimes it's very different from what American writers are writing, for instance, or European historians, and so on.
You know, the problem is here is not only the science, you know, the problem is not only historians. First of all, what's interesting, well, it's my assumption, I would not insist it is so, but it's, I think it is so, that in at least English-speaking world, there is no clear difference between like science and just writings about history. Like in our society, you know, one to be called historian, he has to get appropriate education, whatever, you know, PhD, and write books and stuff. In English-speaking countries, in their culture, historian is anyone who is writing books on history. John Toland, you know, he prepared to write plays, you know, for theater, but didn't happen, so he started to write historic books. You know, it's like very interesting, you know, and then so we have a number of people in those countries like Great Britain, United States, and Canada, whatever. Mostly Great Britain and the United States, definitely, because they're big countries. And they have many people who are called historians, and they advertise as historians all over, like John Toland, you know, or Anthony Beaver, for example. But by our standards, they hardly be called historians, you know, like journalists or whatever, you know, but not historians. But in their world, they're called historians. At the same time, there are a number of serious historians who present totally like very different point of view, like I mentioned in the beginning, David Glantz, American historian, a brilliant historian, I believe. It's a very serious historian, and let's say Russian historians might not agree with all his conclusions, all his opinions, but at least what is important, he would change his opinion if he finds the reason for that. Let's say new documents came to light, and then he look at them and says, well, okay, I have to change my opinion because these new documents, they paint totally different picture than what I had in mind before. But this type of historian, it's very hard reading, you know, like Anthony Beaver or Hastings, you know, Toland, you know, it's very nice, easy reading, you know. You just get a book, you know, get on a chair and relax and enjoy it. But to read the book of David Glantz, then you have to see it, you know, okay, division number of that, division number, you know. But it's science, but those books are not really advertised. It's not like they have in their society kind of different trends. But that trend which comes up, which comes to the media, and let's say Beaver would write a book, and then that book would be advertised by BBC, and then BBC would create documentary based on that book and stuff like that, but who would care about the book of David Glantz? And it's very hard to make any documentary and stuff like that because it's really hard reading, you know, it's well, science. That's why it happens. But for some reason, on the level of mass media, they want to have different picture, and that picture they advertise. And they advertise historians, since they all, by their standards, they called historian. They advertise historian they like. And you know, when Financial Times would say, oh, Beaver or whoever is the best historians, you know, for many people, like well-educated people in English-speaking world, you know, no, Financial Times is definitely, well, it's very serious authority, you know, so it's not historic newspaper, it's about finance, but still, you know, it's for us, it's very hard to imagine because right now we do not have any newspaper or TV station which would possess some like respect of most of the people. Like they have like Financial Times, New York Times, Washington Post, you know, Guardian, something like that. But we do not have anything like that. So for our people, it's very hard to imagine how it happens. But early in Soviet time, we had newspaper Pravda, but well, I don't know, we still have it? No, I don't know.
Yes, yes. It's,
but
it's the main newspaper of the Communist Party.
Yeah, but not many people read it, and definitely nobody cares about that. It's not like Financial Times, you know, in English-speaking world, or New York Times for Americans, Los Angeles Times, whatever. That's why it happens this way.
But do we have some books that you could recommend maybe for Western people to read in English, but with the Russian point of view? Because most of the students, unfortunately, they, or maybe not unfortunately.
I would say again David Clance, but it's not Russian point of view, but it's a very reasonable point of view. You know, I would say that makes it especially interesting because if it was just Russian point of view, we would say it's propaganda. You know, maybe Russians pay him money, you know, whatever. But it's not Russian point of view, but it's a reasonable point of view, and that historian is in search of truth, you know, of what really happened. So his opinion may be different from what is the main opinion here in Russia, but it is reasonable, and it's like from a scientific point, it was very important. When it's not just invented, you know, because very often what they do, they pick up some piece from someone's book, you know, like, and they start to describe it and say, oh, you know, look what happened. And then, you know, you go to the original book and find that the whole story was just invented, told by someone who just, there is no source for this whole story. But definitely doesn't do this type of things.
Олег Vladimirovich, let's sum up. What are the main lessons learned from the Second World War, and maybe there are some special lessons that which were learned from the war against Japan on the Far East?
Well, the Second World War, actually, it's a great experience in human history because they totally different countries and with their politicians like hating each other. Well, Roosevelt and Stalin were kind of respectful between themselves, but Churchill hated Stalin, you know, and stuff like that. But still, it's a good example when the real danger came over the world. The very different countries with different political, economical system, very different politicians, like different personalities, were able to come together and solve this problem. And another thing is very important. Well, definitely, well, Japanese can feel sorry that it happened, that the war ended the way it ended, but well, it's a lesson that you wouldn't have to start the aggressive war. And if you didn't, nothing bad probably would happen. And probably Russians wouldn't ask for Kuril Islands or whatever, and somehow would deal with South Sakhalin. If it was friendly country next to Russian border, why would Russians bother, you know, to fight and take these territories? And they could just talk to them and solve all the problems. And it's another lesson of this whole war. If people talk and try to solve their problems, they would be much better off, all of them. And definitely nobody would suffer heavy losses like millions of people, on at least hundreds of thousands of people for some countries, millions for some countries, hundreds of thousands, but still great numbers of people lost in that war.
And one more thing, during the war, the Soviet Union and the United States, Great Britain, France, they were allies. And it seemed that the relations were improving, but soon after the war, the situation deteriorated and the Soviet Union and the Western states, they stopped being allies and become foes in the Cold War. Why did it happen, and why did it happen so fast?
Well, yeah, it's a very, actually very sad story, and I believe this nowadays the Soviet Union was blamed for occupation, as it called, occupation of Eastern Europe. So I wouldn't say it was an occupation of Eastern Europe. Soviets definitely supported communist forces in those countries where those communist forces exist. Like in Austria, there were no communist forces. I think they got like 5% during the first elections. So Soviet Union didn't bother to support Austrian communists, but it supported them in Poland, for example. It didn't support communists in Yugoslavia, and they, by themselves, they created a socialist state in Yugoslavia. So that's why we cannot say it was occupation in Soviet Union forced them to have communist regimes, because, you know, Soviet troops stayed in Austria till 1955, and there was no communist regime in Austria, and they came to Yugoslavia for like about month and a half in 1944, and in Yugoslavia they created communist states. So, but why Soviet Union had to push, you know, forward to help local communists in most of Eastern European country? It's, I believe, the reason is the Cold War. If there was not a Cold War, there would be no point for Soviet Union. It would be quite good, you know, with like governments similar like Social Democrats and stuff, which would provide, you know, kind of friendly relation with Soviet Union. But when the Western countries became hostile to Soviet Union, they definitely wanted to create some kind of territory in between its own border and the Western countries. And why it happened, it's hard to say. It's very sad and very actually difficult question, because as much as I know that personal relations between Roosevelt and Stalin were kind of very respectful, and they were trying to get together. They never had a chance to talk together without anyone else, like Churchill or anyone else. And they tried during the whole war to get together and talk. And maybe if Roosevelt, and it's still not clear, you know, what happened with Roosevelt. You know, there are some people who say he was killed, but it's not. But I cannot say he was killed. Nobody knows. But there are suspicions about that. I believe if he was still alive later in 1945, somehow that relations would probably develop in a different way. Because, you know, like in Western countries, you know, in Soviet Union, we had quite, I would say, primitive political system. The whole society would act in a certain direction. You know, it was not like much difference between different groups within a Soviet bureaucracy. But in Western society, like in American society, the society combined of many group interests, many corporations, parties, unions, whatever, religious groups, and each of these groups has its own interest, and each group tries to influence the central government and stuff like that. And it is always all this struggle between those groups. It's going on, and well, we can see what's happening now in the United States. You know, it's just like, I can't believe, you know, when I see what's happening there, but it's still, we see this struggle between different groups. It's going all the time, and at that time it was like that. So some groups wanted to develop good relations with Soviet Union, and actually, you know, how many Americans came to Soviet Union during the 1930s, during the Soviet industrialization. Well, some estimates say from 300,000 to 400,000 of American engineers, workers, and whatever, you know, came to work for Russian industrialization. Can you imagine the extent of the relations? Like up to 4,000 Americans in 1930s living in Soviet Union and building a Soviet industry. So we had definitely good perspective, but some groups probably didn't like it, didn't want to have Soviet Union as a competitor, and they took over after President Roosevelt passed away.
We have a very interesting comment from our viewer. I would dare to say the Western mistrust started already during the alliance and became very clear in Berlin, and especially during the end of the war with Japan. Do you agree with this?
You know, there was a certain distrust, but definitely, I think it was to a certain extent from both sides. But you know, one actually example shows that Stalin, you know, did what he promised, and it's actually a very sad story. It's a communist uprising in Greece in 1946, and Soviets would not get involved. They would not provide weapons, they would not send military force, and they would allow British to suppress this uprising. And I actually remember, like many years ago, I talked to one old Greek guy who served in the Greek Navy at that time, and he described how they well, there was some kind of island, Greek island, where they had a prison filled with communists. And they had like some kind of riot on that island. And then Greek Navy came and started to shell that island, kill many people. And he said, oh, you know how bad it was. But he was a young soldier, maybe 18 years old, like young sailor, you know. What was not his decision, but what he remembers, you know, all this story. And Soviet Union didn't do anything. He actually let it happen because it promised British that Greece would go to their sphere of influence. You know, so Soviets did what they promised. But in some places, you know, they, like in Poland, Soviet got upper hand in Poland.
So maybe during the war, there was just no time for, well, for mistrust. The main idea, the main thought was to end the war, to defeat Hitler, and
yeah, you know, and Hitler and with Japan, it's the same, because Americans estimated they would need at least 2 million troops to invade Japan, and they expected up to 1 million losses invading Japan, and then they estimated that the war would not end until the end of 1946, or maybe would go into 1947. So, you know, during the war, it was a matter of sacrificing hundreds of thousands of people. And definitely, even like President Truman, if he likes Stalin or not, it doesn't matter, but he wouldn't like to sacrifice some 2, 3, 400,000 American troops. That's why, you know, so their relations with Stalin were not, seems to be very good, but still he would prefer Russians to get involved to save on American lives, and it's like reasonable. Why not? He was American president. He was to preserve lives of American soldiers.
So we're talking already for an hour and a half almost. I guess there's time left only for 2 last questions.
Yes.
Lukian, it's your turn.
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, my question is more about contemporary life. It seems that during 75 years after Second World War, we were able to build a modern world without global wars. So Yalta-Potsdam system works, UN was created. But then recently we started to find ourselves in the line with Axis, with the line of Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and military Japan. There are more and more voices of different politicians who try to claim Soviet Union. So why for us it's important to prevent the history from rewriting the history of the Second World War? And are we able to do this?
You know, in some way, our victory in the Great Patriotic War and in a major part of Second World War, I would say it's probably the main achievement of our country in 20th century. You know, because there are different opinions about communist revolution, Russian communist revolution of 1917, and well, people have a right to have any opinion of that revolution. But but consequence of that revolution was program of industrialization, program of education, program of whatever, public health, everything. And that country, which was created as a result of that revolution, based on ideas of that revolution, it won the war. It was able to withstand, like France was not able, Poland was not able, while England was saved by, the sea. If it was on continent, nobody knows if it could resist, So if we rewrite the history of the war, blame Soviet Union for the beginning of the war, whatever, it would deny the whole meaning of Russian history in 20th century, at least in first half of 20th century. Then there would be like, what was that all about? At least right now we can say it all made sense what happened, either we like it or not, because it allowed us to win that war. Because if we didn't win that war, they wouldn't exist any longer. There would be no Russians and probably no other nations who live on our territory. And it's would make our history of this period totally useless. That's why we cannot just throw it away and say, oh, some communists did it, or I don't care, we're not communists. Well, we're still Russian.
Oleg Vladimirovich, thank you very much. I guess I'll have the honor to ask you the last question of this evening. I know that there are no specialists on the future, but still the history can teach us some very important lessons. And knowing this history, the history of the Second World War and the reasons that led to this war, the rise of far-right movements and isolationists and so on and so forth, there are many things that are similar today. And there are many people who say that if we don't do something, this can end very badly. What do you think? Which are the steps, judging from the history, that we can take now to avoid such disasters in our future?
Well, it's not easy to say, but
I know that's why I'm asking this question.
But definitely, I would say, and sometimes I might even write on Facebook something. Oh, our government doesn't do that. It has to Well, the best way, definitely, for every side, for each government, for our government as well, not to make any sharp movements, try to talk, try to explain, and to spend the most energy to do that, to create a conversation, dialogue with the different sides of the conflict. Because, right now it looks like the whole world is again at the point when it can collapse into some kind of mess, and nobody would like it to happen, definitely. Well, maybe some people would, but not normal people. But the only way just to avoid any sharp movements, any sharp saying, any threats to anyone, try to solve any problem, maybe make a step forward, step back, and these type of things. But what else?
Thank you very much. That's what we are trying to participate in here at the Russian Center in Brussels. We're trying to create a dialogue between Europe and Russia, between Russia and Europe. And I would like to thank all of you, all of our participants, and first of all, of course, our expert, historian, Oleg Stryzhkov. Thank you very, very much for your interesting conversation. I am sure that everyone who listened was satisfied with this evening, because I certainly am. For me, it was very interesting. I would like to thank all of my colleagues, Lukiana Suvorova, of course, the director of the Russian Center, Vera Bunin, without whom everything this wouldn't have been possible. I would like to remind all of you that we were recording this conversation. It will be available at our website, ruscenter.be, and on our Facebook. So if you missed something, or you just was so excited that you would like to see this conversation again and again, you can definitely do so at our website or on our group on Facebook. And of course, this was the first such a discussion. Our connecting points will continue. We have more interesting topics and interesting experts waiting for, well, for you to see them and talk to them. Thank you very much, Oleg Vladimirovich. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much as well. Thank you, my colleagues. And I would like to remind you that for the moment, our program, the program of events of Russian Cultural Center, is concentrated mostly online. So you can see all our events on our YouTube channel, and we'll publish as well the film of this, the video of this discussion. So it will be watched by another participants during the coming days. And thank you very much, and welcome to other events of Russian Center in Brussels, online and here in our center in Brussels. Thank you so much.
I just would like to say that around 380 people observed our discussion today, so it's already a good success.
Yeah, great. Everyone who watched this, thumbs up. Bye. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.